So this lecture will be about fracking. So you've probably all heard the term fracking, and maybe you know it's bad, but you don't really know what the fuck that means. What is fracking, right? What does that even mean? So this is going to be a fairly short lecture, actually, and we're just going to go over the basics of fracking. In class, I would also normally show the documentary Gasland. And so I highly recommend that you give that a watch because it's very informative, it's very good. Keep in mind it is a documentary, so it's going to be biased, but I think it does a really good job at showing how sort of environmentally disastrous fracking really is. So what is fracking? Well, fracking is shorthand for hydraulic fracturing. And hydraulic fracturing is the process of drilling down into the earth. So you drill down where you think there's oil, right, or where you know there's oil because you've hired a geologist to find it. The problem is that oil is in the little cracks in between rocks. Typically, the rock is called shale, and so you drill down into that rock, okay, and then you drill horizontally, and you just go a little bit of the way, and then once you've got this tunnel dug and encased in cement to theoretically protect the groundwater and the ecosystems from leakage, you send a high-pressure water mixture with water and chemicals through that tube to blast through the rock and hopefully release the gas that's locked inside of that rock. So in this water mixture, you have water, you have sand to kind of smash things up, and chemicals. You inject it at very high pressure, which allows the gas to be released from the rock, and then you reverse the flow and you suck it out the same tunnel. So it can be carried out vertically, but more commonly you drill down and then you drill across. And that way, when you drill across, you can like make little roads off of that and stuff, and see and get all of the possible oil in that region that you possibly can. So here's a map showing what I just described. So you have at the surface the wellhead, and then you drill down, usually pretty far, 7,000-8,000 feet, several miles, even more. And hopefully up here, your well and your channel are very well protected. Double concrete, all sorts of protection supposedly to prevent anything from seeping out into, for example, the water that people drink, or underground rocks where it can then seep out somewhere else. Okay, so you drill down really far. You go all the way down to where you think the oil is, and then you start to turn. You go horizontally, and then you stop. And then you shoot this high-pressure water, sand, chemicals in. It blasts through a fissure, right, into the rock, cracks open the rock, fracks open the rock, if you will, and then you suck the water and the mixture back out, the waste back out, and then hopefully along with that comes the gas and the oil that you're gonna then sell as a fuel. So the oil flows out of the well. It's the water is stored in these pits, this wastewater. It's like really gross, chemically shitty wastewater, which is then moved from the pits to the treatment plant, supposedly to make it better again. The oil is sometimes stored in storage tanks, and then it's picked up periodically to be delivered to a pipeline where it's then sent off to Chicago or somewhere to be refined in a gas refinery and then sold as fuel for cars or whatever, or factories, that sort of thing. Sent to the grid, sent to a power plant. So this is what it looks like from an airplane. This is what an oil and gas fracking field near Odessa, Texas looks like. So each of these little dots is a well. So this is what this individual well here. This is what it looks like. That's just one well. So you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands, really, of wells in a single fracking field. And they're connected by these dirt roads. So the environmental impact of this, right, the disaster part of it, isn't just that they're removing this fossil fuel, which is of course bad for the climate, it's bad for the environment, it's bad for everything, but they're also destroying so much of the Earth's surface, right, to install these fracking fields. And so they're demolishing parts of the Earth's surface to put these wells in with little care and little oversight and little regulation. And then there's the problem of the waste. Okay, so there's quite a few problems here, but this is what a fracking field looks like, and this is what a kind of an individual well looks like at night. I think I have some more pictures here on the next slide. Here's another example. Here's a fracking field in a more sort of mountainous, hilly region, and then here are two examples of wells. So here's a well and here's a well. So they're not huge. I mean, they're big, but they're not enormous for an individual well. But they're again, in a fracking field, there are thousands of them. Okay, so the way that they get around actually being regulated is that an individual well is a fairly small operation. And so they say each one is its own operation, so it doesn't have to be regulated. It's how the regulatory rules and laws are written in our country. And so they get away with it by having all these individual small wells and a big field. And so actually from space, if you look at the night lights, this arrow is pointing to the Bakken Shale, which is where there's a big field for fracking. And you can see that all those little wells have lights on them, right? And so added up, it almost looks like a city on the scale of Minneapolis or Chicago or Denver, right? But it's not. It's just a fracking field. And this is a very popular place where fracking has expanded significantly in the last couple of decades, is in this part of North Dakota, western North Dakota, in what's known as the Bakken Shale. Here are some more maps. Here's the actual wellhead itself. It's a fairly small wellhead. You can see, like, on the human scale, right? Lots of pipes to pump in and out the wastewater and pump in and out pump out the oil or the gas, right? A lot of hydraulics happening, yeah, it's a fairly tight and compact operation. They'll move into a fracking field and they'll frack it for a couple of years, and then there won't be any oil left, and so they'll just abandon it and move to a new one. So the whole operation is also fairly mobile. There are two places that are typically fracked, where this type of oil and gas is typically found, and the most common one is in shale. So shale rock formations have become an important source of natural gas in the U.S. Shale is a rock. It's a flaky rock type of rock found very far deep beneath the Earth's surface, and it's flaky and it's cracky, and so in all those little cracks, you've got some oil and gas that couldn't be extracted using traditional methods, because traditional methods rely on sort of a big sort of field of oil, or a big kind of, you can think of it like a pool or an underground reservoir of gas or oil. In shale, it's just tiny little bits, but if you frack it, you can suck them all out like a straw. You can suck all of the oil out from all the little cracks in the shale. You can also get oil and gas through fracking from tight sands. Very similar to shale. It's like a fine-grained sandstone or a carbonate with a fairly low permeability, but in all of those little holes, you have little oil and gas that can be removed through hydraulic fracturing. All right, so where is it? A lot of fracking is going on in the U.S. We have a lot of fracking fields. We have a lot of shale plays, is what they're called. Shale plays. I didn't come up with the words. So a shale play is just somewhere where there is shale or tight sands that can be fracked. And there's a bunch of oil and gas that can be fracked out of that shale. So in North America, you can see that there's a big shale play here along the western side of the Appalachian Mountains, the Marcellus Shale, which is right here. There's also the Bakken Shale, and then there are a bunch of smaller shale plays in the south part of the U.S., like in Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Oklahoma, like the Woodford and the Barnett and the Eagle Ford. These shale fields have been fracked the longest, which is still not very long, by the way. And newer fields are the Marcellus and the Bakken, and then also we're moving into Michigan here, where there's some fracking wells that are being constructed in northern Michigan. All of the red dots on this map here indicate where there is a fracking well, a fracking well that's producing oil or gas. So the shales themselves are all of the, like where there could be a well is all the light blue or the yellow, or the green where they overlap. But where there's actually a well is where the red dots are. So there's a lot of potential for more fracking wells to be constructed in the next several decades. So fracking is a big, 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 big business in the U.S. Big business. So here's a zoom in of that map in the lower 48. Again, you can see the Marcellus Shale, the Bakken Shale, the Barnett Shale. The Woodford Shale is a fairly productive shale play in Oklahoma. Yeah, so the current plays, and there's some prospective plays, and then there's the basins where there could potentially be more pockets of shale, of oil found in shale, oil or gas, that can be fracked. Okay. There's also a lot of fracking happening on the Front Range and the back range, I don't know what you would call this, of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. So some of the major shale plays, as I have mentioned now a couple times, are Marcellus and Bakken and Woodford and Barnett. Normally, if we had class together, I would ask you to get into groups to read about your shale play and create an informative one or several slide presentation. I'm not going to do that, but I encourage you to just, Wikipedia or Google these shale plays just to see kind of the unique things about each one of them that distinguishes them from the other and also makes them kind of similar. These are just the four main ones. There are other shale plays throughout the United States, but these are the big ones that are currently being fracked. All right, so what are the environmental disaster aspects of fracking? So first of all, we know that it's bad because we're taking gas and oil out of the ground and then we're sending it into the atmosphere where it can cause global warming. Okay, so part one. That's already bad. But there's also some more local effects from fracking that make fracking actually an environmental disaster. And that's why I encourage you to watch the documentary Gasland. If any of you have not watched it and need it, I own it and can figure out a way to get you access to it. But DM me on Slack for the specific instructions on how to do that. All right, so let's just go through this infographic here. So I think it's a good one. So what are some ways that fracking can become an environmental disaster? One, wastewater can escape from the injection wells and the storage facilities. And that wastewater is full of thousands of chemicals, hundreds to thousands of chemicals, where it can wreak havoc on aquifers, underground water, right, where we get our drinking water and our irrigation water, or on streams themselves. Okay. Two, methane, nitrous oxides, and other compounds can escape from the wellhead itself. These are greenhouse gases. They're more potent than carbon dioxide, and they can escape from the wellhead and cause local sort of effects on human health and then global scale impacts on the climate. Obviously, there's a lot of light and noise that is generated from these fracking fields. There's a lot of habitat that's lost and fragmented. You saw those satellite pictures of fracking fields where they just kind of like destroy a whole swath of the Earth's surface. So you're destroying forests and grassland and animals' homes and species habitats and that sort of thing. There's also pollution that's occurring through the transport and supply of waste and the oil itself through trucks. Maybe they get in an accident. They're emitting fossil fuels because they're running on gas, presumably, like gasoline. Also, a blowout or a spill can happen at the wellhead. It wouldn't be a spill on the scale of like the Exxon Valdez or the Deepwater Horizon, but it could be a small local oil or gas spill that would damage the habitat, could get into the groundwater, again, could seep down rivers, flow downstream, end up far away from where the well itself actually is, just from a small blowout or from a small spill. The well casing itself, the stuff keeping the well together, might fail, which would result in aquifer contamination, right? That's a big problem, and you'll see in the Gasland video In Colorado, they have some folks like turn on their faucet, and the faucet water in the faucet is on fire, presumably because there is gas in the water, in the drinking water, that escaped maybe from the wells. And the containment ponds themselves might leak wastewater out through the bottom, and that could also get into the aquifer. And then again, more effects on the hydrologic system. You're actually removing water from rivers to supply water for this fracking operation, right? You need water to send down through the well to actually frack, and so you're damaging the streams, you're disrupting the flow of the stream, you're damaging the habitat within the stream, the fish, the other microorganisms that are living in these streams, and rivers, and so there are a number of environmental impacts from fracking that absolutely make fracking an environmental disaster, without question. Here's another infographic showing basically the same thing as the previous one, but also highlighting that another major environmental disaster that can result from fracking is earthquakes. So you're disrupting the rock in the ground. And so as you're disrupting the rock and you're removing things from the rock, as that rock resettles, it can cause an earthquake. Okay? And I'll have more on that in, I think, a couple more slides, but I have a graphic on earthquakes from fracking. But fracking and shale gas production is a really new thing, like literally since the year 2000, okay? So there was some minor fracking operations being set up in the 70s and the 80s, but most of the fracking has come about in the last 20 years. So since the year 2000 or so, you can see billion cubic feet that was being fracked or produced per day was about 2.5, 3 billion cubic feet per day. It is now I think this was made in 2015 or 16. It was about 40 billion cubic feet per day, and it's even higher now. So if we look at this in relation to the number of central and eastern U.S. earthquakes, so we know there are a lot of earthquakes in the western U.S., but the central and the eastern U.S., typically not as many earthquakes. You can see this big spike beginning in 2000 and really picking up after 2008, probably due to fracking. Why? Because if I look here, most of these earthquakes have been concentrated in Oklahoma, and some in at this sort of four corners here between Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, 5 corners, I guess. And these are two places where there are huge fracking fields, especially here in the Woodford play, the shale play. You just have a ton of earthquakes being recorded, probably due to fracking, where there normally wouldn't be this many earthquakes. So from the years 1973 to 2008, there were 858 earthquakes, and then just in the 6 years from 2009 to April 2015, there was almost twice as many earthquakes due to this huge, rapid increase in fracking, which you can see starting in 2009. So the correlation here is not coincidental. Absolutely not. Looking again at this, in particular, this particular shale play in Oklahoma, the Woodford Shale, right? This is where the earthquakes from fracking have been concentrated. And you can see that the chance of damage from an earthquake in 2016 was higher, actually, in Oklahoma than it was on the entire San Andreas Fault in California, which is a very active fault, and has caused several sort of major headline-creating, blockbuster earthquakes in the last, however many years. Actually, the chance of damage from an earthquake in 2016 was between 10 and 17% in parts of Oklahoma where there is very, very high density of fracking wells. So it absolutely is the case that fracking, especially in Oklahoma, and I also mentioned over here, right, in southern Illinois and along the Mississippi River here, there is a very high risk of earthquakes from fracking. And so I would consider this also to be an environmental disaster. And so, and earthquakes aren't even like climate or sort of what we normally would consider sort of like nature, climate change, Earth system, that sort of thing. Those are the rocks. It's typically a separate field of study, actually. But even in the rocks, fracking is an environmental disaster. And of course, how it happens is you send the well down, and then maybe this is the region that you're fracking right here. And as you're moving the rocks around, as you're sucking things out of the rocks, those rocks are settling, and maybe you get a pre-existing fault that was fairly dormant before has now been shooken up, and you get seismicity, induced seismicity. You have an epicenter, and then you have a small earthquake, or maybe you have a large earthquake. All because you've rattled around the rocks from fracking them. So before I end this, I just want to make a distinction that fracking versus tar sands, they're different things. So you may have heard about the tar sands in Alberta, in northern Alberta, Canada. Tar sands are also an unconventional way that we can extract oil and gas, but they're different than shale plays, which is what we are fracking. So we're not fracking the tar sands. We're removing the oil from the tar sands in different ways, also unconventional ways, but different unconventional ways. So that's not fracking, but is also a big environmental problem, a big environmental disaster, but is not fracking. I just want to distinguish between the two, that there are shale plays and there are tar sands, and the shale plays are what's fracked. All right, so that is all I have for this quick lecture on fracking. Again, reminder, highly recommend watching the documentary Gasland. All right. I think that's